maybe just start us off a little bit in framing up the question of, hey, why are companies leveraging multiple clouds? And what does that really present in terms of challenges kind of leading into the why you might want direct cloud connectivity?
Every day, we're out there helping clients consume cloud effectively, right? It starts with, a customer wanting to take advantage of the agility that the cloud can bring to a business. And in order to sort of start the process, you have to look at the applications closely and figure out, can the application reside on cloud infrastructure effectively? But there's really nothing that I think is more important than the user experience, and that relies heavily on the network connectivity that gets put in place, the architecture. Megaport is one of our most critical partners because of the way they do things from a cloud connectivity standpoint.
They might be in Azure already or GCP or whatever. And typically what we'll see is customers are connected, but they might be using a VPN appliance to connect because that's the easiest way for them to get started and things like that. But when they start, as Mike said, having these workloads that are getting moved there, that they're trying to still present in a way that gives the users a good experience, even though they're not physically and obviously in the same environment. They give the flexibility to be able to connect all of these hyperscalers in one pane of glass.
Can you just take us through a little bit from just a general architecture perspective, like what is the solution, how does it bolt in, and what's it actually doing? That would be probably a great starting point before we get into some more detail.
We've already built out the network, and that our customers are going to connect to us in one of our enabled locations, which are typically third-party data centers for across roughly 100 different data center operators globally. We really take the complexity of managing multiple network links that the customer typically would have to manage if they go multi-cloud. Our customers are going to connect to us directly to a Megaport owned router in one of our enabled data center locations. We're going to route them over our private layer 2 network platform to the B end, which is typically another physical connection where we're connected to the cloud provider edge. We're also then operating a software defined network that integrates the connectivity to the cloud provider. So essentially we're setting up the layer 2 service all the way from the data center where they connect to Megaport all the way into ultimately their cloud resources, to where the customer manages all of the routing directly with their private environment in the cloud, right?
And the expense associated with these connections are pretty large, right? And it's single threaded. It does that connection usually does one thing. And oh, by the way, it's marked up 30, 40, 50, 100% versus what you can do if you get creative with the architecture, leveraging Megaport's technologies.
Talk to us a little bit about, how Megaport can provide room to grow if a customer wants to start off with a little bit lower speed connection because the demands aren't that high, but ultimately they're going to want to move up as their resources increase. What's that look like?
But there are limitations in how fast you can connect to the cloud over a VPN. Meaning like a native VPN into those hyperscalers. But one of the other challenges that folks don't realize necessarily is that by default, just using AWS as an example, if you want to get a direct connect in AWS, you're already starting at a gig of bandwidth and then moving up from there. Otherwise, you have to use a third-party partner, which then you can buy a sub-rate connection and then ratchet it up, but it's still referred to as a direct connect, where you're using a direct connect partner to get that connectivity. And again, that is a single threaded connection that specifically pertains to AWS. So the biggest bang for the buck that I could possibly give you about this as it relates to Megaport is that not only can you get a smaller amount of bandwidth and scale it up as you need to, you can also do it on an almost like a real-time basis. One of the cool things that Megaport allows you to do, basically increase or decrease the amount of bandwidth that you want to use based on the workload. So it's a huge benefit for customers, not only from the fact that they can now scale up from sub-rate 1 gig to much higher bandwidth with the same provider, but they can also be very, very cost conscious and effective in being able to control those costs by using the tools that are available to them through Megaport.
Ducio mentioned there are some pitfalls, right? Unpredictable performance, inherently less secure, and there are actually some economic factors too, because the egress charges, basically the majority of the cloud providers will bill you when you pull information out, are substantially higher when connecting over the public internet. So we actually built a network specifically for cloud consumption. So it's really all about letting consumers connect to cloud and consume those resources how they want, when they want. So in the same way that they could spin up compute storage within the cloud itself, they can do the same thing with our network.
So I'll talk a little bit about a quick story of a company that went from 10 employees to 70 employees in a year, and then made a leap from 70 employees to 200 in the next year. Let's run a gigabit fiber connection from your location, right to that data center, a layer 2 point to point. And we'll just run that connection to the meet me room in that data center. And from there, we'll do a cross connect to Megaport. You're going to be able to use this last mile connection, layer 2, from your headquarters to the data center, and cross connect virtually and get a port directly into all these different environments that are critical to your business.
Taking the example that Mike alluded to with these different SaaS providers that are out there, to be able to connect to them using Megaport as the conduit to do that without having capabilities like that, for example, you'd have a much more challenging task, because you'd be accessing those environments in a much different way, which could affect your folks' performance, your clients' performance within the organization. So it's a tremendous benefit. And basically what Mike really, he said it all, but what he really gave the guy was anything you pretty much want to do, even though you don't know you need to do, you can do it.
It's a private connection model, right? So it's not being routed over the internet. Specific to, Megaport, when a customer connects to our network, it's routed over Megaport owned and operated switches end to end, ultimately where the traffic egresses to the cloud provider. So your traffic, when it passes across Megaport, it's never going to touch the internet. So you're not going to be having BGP hijacks, things like that. You're also not going to be routed to a third party. You're going to be going over a layer 2 pipe from point A, ultimately to point B, where your data is going to go into, either one of our service providers or more likely one of the hyperscalers.
And really, once it's actually implemented, which again, it's all relatively real time, they could more or less set it and forget it. And we even have an open RESTful API. So some of our power users, I like to coin them as, when they're really doing things with the elasticity and auto scaling of resources within the cloud, they'll actually take the time to write to our API and automate things even further. All the connections themselves, we call them virtual cross connects, right? They have no term. Those cloud routers I mentioned, also no term.
It's just a product and service that facilitates user experience, positive user experience.
To the panelists, thank you guys for taking the time this afternoon. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks,
I certainly learned a lot. And to the attendees, thanks for taking an hour out of your time and joining PTP and Megaport.